from a station working for you. This is WRTV News at 5:30, streaming now.
Now at 5:30, a big day for IPS students. For many, the first day in a classroom in months. The plan for the state's largest school district moving forward. And making recycling more convenient. The new Indianapolis location, that means many residents won't have to drive miles out of their way. Chris?
Topping our lineup today, more locations are starting to let you get tested for COVID before you fly to avoid quarantining when you get there. We're taking a look into whether this is actually an effective strategy. And new documents are revealing why mailboxes were just disappearing this summer and what it means for the election. And you may have noticed your dog acting a bit differently than maybe when you first adopted it. How science is backing up that personality change. We're taking a look into the reason behind it all.
But first at 5:30, for thousands of students, today was the first day they were back in the classroom. Indianapolis Public Schools welcomed back some students in grades 4 through 12 for the first time since this past March. IPS is phasing those students back into the classroom after keeping them at home for the first 2 months of the school year. Students in pre-K through 3rd grade were already back in class. Today on Good Morning Indiana, our Kelsey Anderson asked the superintendent what they've learned so far about in-person teaching during a pandemic.
You know, we felt really good about our procedures and protocols that we had in place when we had our youngest students back in the building. So we think we just need to make sure that we are executing on those this week as we welcome back the rest of our students.
Okay, and so tell me a little bit about these screenings. You're asking parents to screen their kids before they come to school.
That's right. We just want to be sure that we're being extra vigilant about health and safety for our staff and our students, and so that parents are just checking for any symptoms, and if anything pops up, that they keep their child at home and don't send them to school.
IPS students who are attending in person will be required to wear a mask both on the bus and inside school buildings. Here's a closer look at how IPS is now operating. Most students in pre-K through 6th grades will attend classes in person 5 days a week. Students in grades 7 through 12 will attend class on a hybrid schedule with roughly half the student body in the classroom each day. Parents of any IPS students still have the option of full-time virtual learning. And Indianapolis residents who want to be green now have a new recycling option. The Department of Public Works is putting a new recycling box at the Pike Township Trustee's office on the northwest side. This site is 8.5 miles from Broad Ripple Park, which had previously been the closest recycling location for northwest side residents. The new box is located at 5665 Lafayette Road. Kyle.
Well, we started off with some rain this morning. That is something we haven't done for quite a while. The clouds, though, those never left central Indiana as we're checking out that view from Greencastle. But with the cloud cover, it really helps that fall color to start to pop out there. Indianapolis here since Sunday night, almost an inch, and I do think we'll get there with additional rain on the way. But we still have a ways to go here. Since September 1st, our deficit remains at about 3¼ inches, or 3/4 of an inch there. There's the rain moving back toward the Terre Haute and Sullivan areas for us now. The steadiest of the rain will be near and south of I-70. This is 8 o'clock this evening on TrueCast. There you can see pockets of mainly light rain for us, and we'll see that expanding in coverage here as we go into the overnight. But by tomorrow morning at 4 a.m., you can see really the focus for additional rain around North Vernon and to Seymour there. So southeastern locations likely to see the highest rainfall totals. Could see over 1/2 inch in some of those spots, about 1/3 of an inch in Indy. But once again, it will drop off pretty quickly as we make our way to the north. With those clouds, we got 50 downtown, 48 in Kokomo and Bloomington. We will talk about a warming trend in the forecast in just a few minutes. Chris?
Let's start the news feed. The Supreme Court will look at a Trump administration policy that makes asylum seekers wait in Mexico for U.S. hearings. The case won't be heard until after the election. The policy was first introduced in January of 2019. Another immigration case the Supreme Court will hear has to do with border wall funding. The Trump administration is appealing a lower court ruling that says it improperly diverted money to build parts of the wall. This case will also not be heard until after the election. Travel restrictions will continue next month along U.S. borders. Both borders will remain closed to non-essential travel through November 21st. The head of Homeland Security says they are looking to find ways to ease restrictions in the future. Well, the pace of the second wave of COVID-19 has pushed new cases over 40 million worldwide. Cases have doubled since mid-August. And we just saw a record high of new cases in a single day. Europe is dealing with a surge, seeing more infections based on population than the United States, but overall, the U.S. still has the most cases and deaths.
Some people call it a surge. I'm not sure we ever got over the second surge, but the virus has shown a really crafty way of getting into areas where we're not paying attention.
Now, amid concerns about rising cases, there's a new push to make sure that you wear your mask. Research says if 95% of Americans wore masks in public, we could avoid tens of thousands of deaths before the end of the year. Right now, less than 70% of people are wearing masks. And the virus spreading in rural areas the way it did at the beginning of the pandemic in larger cities.
My profession, there are 12,000 of us. We don't cover all of the United States. In a smaller town, you might be a couple hundred miles from an infectious disease doctor.
Now, the main impact of wearing a mask is not infecting people around you. Dr. Daniel McQuillan says people are infectious in the days before they show any symptoms, if any at all. Just take a look at a case of some Missouri hairstylists.
2 stylists did 140 clients in a week. Every client wore a mask. One of the stylists had early COVID and didn't realize it. And the only person who got infected was her coworker. And the reason that happened was because they would do lunch breaks together, take their masks off and eat and spend some time in a small room. But none of their clients got sick. And this is in a small space where we know the risk is higher.
Now look for new Mask Up America ads online at bus stops, billboards, and other public gathering spots. All right, next in our lineup, more locations are starting to let you get tested for COVID before you fly. That's to avoid a mandatory quarantine. We're taking a look into whether or not that's actually an effective strategy. Pre-flight COVID testing is starting to become an option to avoid doing a 14-day quarantine when you get to your final destination. Starting November 1st, you'll be allowed to travel to Costa Rica from the U.S. if you get a negative PCR test taken within 72 hours of leaving the U.S. The Bahamas is taking it a step further. Starting November 1st, you can travel there if you get a negative PCR test 7 days before your trip. Then you'll have to get a rapid antigen test when you get there and 4 days later. Hawaii lifted its 14-day quarantine last week for people who have a negative PCR test within 72 hours of the flight.
Having these alternatives to quarantine related to travel creates some confusion about what a test really means in the context of quarantine. So I worry a little bit that we're losing the message, that a test is only just a moment in time.
Dr. Shira Dorone says because of the incubation period for COVID, you can have it anytime between 2 and 14 days after you're exposed. A negative result is only at the time you took the test. Recent studies have shown your risk of getting COVID on your flight, if everybody's wearing a mask, it's very low.
I think, the bigger into an influx of people incubating COVID-19 into an island that may have done a really good job controlling the pandemic, and on the flip side, really needs that tourist revenue.
Now, she says places like the Bahamas that require multiple tests is more effective. Now, it could be a challenge to get that test before you leave. Dr. Dorone says many hospitals stopped doing pre- and post-travel testing just because of a lack of supplies. The turnaround time on getting the test, that's also an issue. The companies doing mail-in tests are getting results back faster, but it is going to cost you a lot of money. All right, we got more to get to, and a lot of new documents are revealing why mailboxes were disappearing this summer and what it means for the election. The risk of homelessness looms large for many across the country as people deal with job loss and economic uncertainty. Dan Grossman introduces us to one group that decided to do an experiment. What if you give people battling homelessness a set amount of money to help them get on their feet?
The streets can be home to the disenfranchised. Those often ridiculed for their circumstance and plight.
There just wasn't any work available, so it was really frustrating. I was like, well, better dig in for the long haul.
But unless you have lived like Benjamin Dunning, how can you assume the value of help to others like him?
Most of them are just people that got stuck on hard times and trying to figure out how to deal with it.
The National Alliance to End Homelessness estimates right now there are 567,000 people who call the streets their home, a number that has only grown as fears of job loss and evictions have increased since COVID started.
Just sometimes a little bit of a hand up can mean all the difference in whether somebody is going to stabilize and get into housing or not.
As the Chief Public Policy Officer for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, Kathy Alderman deals with many of them and has learned that most times charity received is charity well spent, despite what many might think.
I think it's not surprising at all that people who are struggling with the cost of living and forced to sleep outside would use dollars given to them to get inside into a home.
Back in 2018, a group called Foundations for Social Change, a charitable organization in Canada, gave 50 people experiencing homelessness in Vancouver a lump sum of $5,700 to see what they would do with it.
The key findings were phenomenal. They're actually well beyond my expectations.
Even one of the study's head researchers, Jiaying Zhao, was surprised by what they found when they analyzed the data for the first time recently. In the first month, 70% were able to access a sustainable food source, which they maintained for the rest of the year. They found stable housing at a rate that outpaced those who hadn't received the payments by 12 months. The researchers also found, perhaps most importantly, that spending on items like drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes decreased by 39%.
This actually is counter to our common assumptions of how, these folks would spend the cash. So that was very good to see.
I would save a third, spend a third on the stuff that I know I needed, and then give a third away.
This isn't to say addiction isn't there, but it is to say for folks like Benjamin, stigmas are perhaps one of the greatest barriers to overcome when trying to simultaneously overcome their circumstance.
Having a little bit more compassion, I think, will make this a much easier issue to resolve.
I'm Dan Grossman reporting.
Dan, thank you. And topping the newsfeed, European nations are stepping up restrictions as cases of COVID-19 rise. Switzerland put new restrictions in, including a nationwide mask-wearing mandate after it had more than 8,700 new cases. Wales is requiring everyone to stay home for 2 weeks to fight the spread of the virus. A federal judge is not letting the Trump administration move forward with a rule that could have stripped 700,000 people from food stamps. The rule would have required more food stamp recipients to work to receive benefits. The judge said the Trump administration did not explain how people would be impacted enough. Ireland is looking into how Instagram uses young people's personal data. 2 investigators are looking into the app and seeing if the proper safeguards are in place. Facebook says it is in close contact with the Irish government.
We are just days away from the first sales of the new iPhone 12, which will feature 5G service for the very first time, but it's not cheap. So is it worth buying? Consumer reporter John Matarese lets us know so you don't waste your money.
Apple's announcement about the iPhone 12 is generating more buzz than other recent unveilings because it'll be the first iPhone to use 5G. But is it worth buying, or should you stick with an older model? No flashy Apple announcement this pandemic year. No big crowds at the Apple Store either. But Apple's still expected to sell tens of millions of the new iPhone 12 starting late October. The Washington Post, though, says most people don't need an iPhone 12 now because 5G networks remain limited and far apart, meaning most people will still be using 4G LTE. And brand new phones are never cheap. The cheapest new 12 is the Mini for $700. The standard iPhone 12 will cost $800, and the iPhone 12 Pro with Apple's best camera ever is $1,000. And from the Doesn't That Stink file, the lack of big discounts on new phones these days. Remember when an iPhone was almost free with a 2-year contract? Providers will still sell you one with no upfront charge, but you may pay $25 or $30 a month for years. Want a cheaper upgrade? The Washington Post recommends last year's iPhone 11, currently $600, and those prices could drop even further soon. If 5G and the latest tech is important, then buy it. But you may want to wait a few weeks for some Black Friday deals so you don't waste your money. I'm John Matarese, WRTV.
Well, you did not need those sunglasses today. We needed the umbrella this morning. You can still see some low clouds there in the Bloomington area. the rain temporarily moving out. But hey, it could be snow. This is the view in northern Illinois, just a little west of Rockford there in Freeport. Golf course covered with some snow this afternoon, already starting to melt a little bit. We are exactly a month away from our average first snowfall here in central Indiana. But you can see that snow in northern Illinois. It's going to continue to kind of vanish and stay off to the north. We've got some rain, though, that is starting to move in around Rockville. And there you can see in the Bloomington area, not raining just yet, but the rain is getting a little bit closer here. So this evening, we're going to see those showers returning across central Indiana and will increase in coverage, especially central and southern locations, with temperatures holding upper 40s to right around 50 degrees. Here's a look at TrueCast by 11:30 tonight. You can see we're all fairly covered with some green here, but it will be on the lighter side. I don't think we'll see much in the way of moderate rainfall like we had portions of last night and into this morning. 7 a.m. tomorrow, still a couple lingering showers around Bedford, Seymour, into Greensburg and Connorsville, but the rest of us will be drying out here, just an isolated shower or two through the rest of the day, with those temperatures staying in the 40s, eventually getting into the middle 50s, and I think we'll have a late day high of around 60 degrees, but things are going to be warming up here big time as we get to Wednesday, a high around 70 and even 80 degrees on Thursday. Does come with more chances for rain in the 7-day planning forecast. And once we get another more potent cold front through here on Friday with some showers, possibly a few storms, we're talking about a 20-degree temperature drop with highs only in the 50s Saturday. Chris?
You may remember seeing some unsettling photos on social media this summer. Blue U.S. mail collection boxes unbolted and taken away, just as the president was urging people not to vote by mail. Now, Postal Service records obtained by Newsy's investigative team show that there was likely no cause for alarm. Patrick Terpstra explains why the vanishing mailboxes appear unrelated to the election.
This summer, photos spread online of the Postal Service hauling away mail collection boxes from street corners.
This whole thing with this mail-in ballot.
Just as President Trump ramped up his unfounded warnings about voting by mail.
It's a disaster.
There was panic.
They're not getting this one.
Yet postal records we obtained through the Freedom of Information Act show no evidence the mailbox reductions were all that unusual, and nothing to suggest they had anything to do with the election. Instead, the records back up what Postmaster General Louis DeJoy told Congress, that the removals continued a long trend of cutting back as mail usage goes down.
This is a normal process that's been around since it's been around 50 years.
The records reveal the Postal Service took away 732 mailboxes between mid-June, when DeJoy took over, and mid-August, when he suspended removals after backlash. It was twice as many uprooted mailboxes compared to the same time last year, but eliminations for 2020 are still below each of the past 3 years.
It is really not something surprising. It's certainly not anything that anyone should worry about or be alarmed about.
Only 15 states had more than a dozen mailboxes taken away this summer, and they were a mix of Democrat and Republican-leaning states. Here's something else we noticed in the records we got back. When the Postal Service takes mailboxes offline, they tend to do a bunch at once, possibly explaining those alarming photos of multiple mailboxes on the move.
It's like getting bagels. It's cheaper by the dozen.
We found in many cases a single mailbox was removed from a cluster where one remains today. There are still over 140,000 mailboxes nationwide. And your home is a mail collection location where postal carriers will always pick up outgoing mail 6 days a week. Patrick Terpstra, Newsy, Washington.
Patrick, thank you. And the Postmaster General has said that mailbox removals will resume after the election. Coronavirus test results are coming in quicker. Experts say they're still taking too long, though, especially for minority patients. A survey by several universities found Hispanics and African Americans are waiting about a day longer than white people to receive results. Researchers also found that a high number of people who are testing positive are not called by contact tracers. The news feed starts with new concerns about stress related to the pandemic. An AP NORC poll found a quarter of U.S. workers considered quitting their jobs because of worries about the pandemic. Fears of contracting the virus was a top concern for those working outside the home. Well, during these tough financial times, Target is spreading $70 million to their workers in bonuses. The company raised their minimum wage to $15 in July. A major movie theater chain is opening its doors to some of its locations. AMC will open about a dozen places in New York on Friday. It hopes to have more than 530 theaters open nationwide by the end of the month. Now, finally in our lineup, you may have noticed your dog acts differently than when you first adopted it. How science is now backing up that personality change. We're taking a look into some of the reasons behind it. If your dog's been with your family for years, you may have noticed that they've changed since you first adopted them, not just physically, but in the way that they act. A recent study published in Scientific Reports confirms that. Researchers say behavior may stay the same, but the way dogs express it will change. For instance, if your dogs are active and curious when they're younger, they'll still be that way in comparison to other dogs when they get older, but they may not be as interested in discovering things as they once were.
We know that dogs can become much more mellow. They can become less active, less interested in other animals and other environmental factors around them.
In comparison to humans, there is less of a need for dogs to change their personality over time. Dogs only need to meet basic criteria to survive. Their prime time for development is between puppy age and 7 years old.
You could deduce from it that if you have a dog that has good habits up until the age of 6 or 7, they might retain those habits for the rest of their lives, because at that point they've sort of hit their maximum maturity level. At the same time, bad habits might stick as well.
Now, if you're looking to adopt a puppy, be aware they likely won't be the same dog 10 years down the road. Well, an effort among breweries to use their craft to fight racial injustice is expanding. Tomorrow, the causes you can support with your next drink.
Temperatures only topped out around 50 this afternoon. We are going to start a bit of a warming trend, though. Tomorrow afternoon, we're in the mid to upper 50s, and after that, things will really start to warm up here. Around 70 degrees on Wednesday, chance for a few showers there. 80 on Thursday before a big cool down heading into next weekend, where we're only in the 50s and 60s once again. Thanks for joining us here at 5:30. The news at 6 starts now.